Marcus is sitting at his kitchen table at 11 at night, and the coffee next to him has gone cold enough that a thin skin has formed on top of it. He hasn't touched it in over an hour. His phone is face up on the table, screen still lit from a text his friend sent hours ago, an invite to put $4,000 into a small business deal. Good margins, fast turnaround, somebody he trusts. Next to the phone is a stack of mail he hasn't opened yet because he already knows what's in it. He opens his banking app, does the math, runs the numbers 3 different ways, and after almost an hour of moving decimal points around in his head, he texts back 4 words. I can't afford it. That sentence feels responsible. It feels like the mature, adult thing to say. It's the sentence almost everyone has said at some point about something. And it is also, without Marcus knowing it, the exact sentence that keeps people who think like him from ever building the kind of money the people he's texting about are trying to build. Because here's what nobody tells you: the question, can I afford this, and the question wealthy people actually ask before a decision like this aren't just different phrasings of the same idea. They're not even the same question. Stay with that for a second, because by the end of this you're going to see that one sentence, the one Marcus just typed without thinking twice about it, everywhere in your own financial life. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're not bad with money. Nobody sat you down and explained that there was a different question available to you. You were taught affordability. That's the entire framework. Can I cover this? Do I have enough? Will I be okay? It's not a wrong question. It's just an incomplete one, and the gap it leaves is exactly where wealth quietly stops compounding for most people and keeps compounding for a small number of others. Here's the thing about affordability as a question: it only ever looks backward. It asks what you already have and whether this decision fits inside it. It's a math problem about your current bank balance. It has nothing to do with what happens if the decision goes wrong, and even less to do with what happens if it goes right. The question rich people ask instead is uncomfortable in a different way. It's not, do I have $4,000? It's, if this fails completely, what does that $4,000 actually cost me, and can I survive that cost without it changing my life? Notice that's not a bigger, scarier version of affordability. It's a completely different axis. It's not about the size of the number, it's about the shape of the risk. And this is where it shifts, because once you start asking that question instead, you stop caring about how expensive something is and you start caring about something almost nobody teaches you to measure: asymmetry. How much you could lose compared to how much you could gain if you're wrong. Think about it this way. If you put $4,000 into something and it fails completely, and losing that $4,000 means skipped meals, a missed rent payment, a call to a family member you didn't want to make, that's not a bad investment. That's an unsafe bet, regardless of the return it was promising. But if you put $4,000 into the exact same opportunity, and losing it completely means you're mildly annoyed for a week and nothing else in your life changes, that's not the same $4,000 anymore. It's not even the same decision. Same number, completely different risk. Rich people aren't smarter at spotting good opportunities. They've just trained themselves to measure the downside before they ever look at the upside, and most people do it in the exact opposite order. There's a rule behind this most people never see, but once you do, the pattern becomes obvious everywhere you look for it. We'll come back to that. You might already be pushing back on this a little. Something like, sure, but that's easy to say when you already have money to lose. When losing $4,000 doesn't threaten your rent, of course you can afford to think about it that way. And that reaction is fair. It's also quietly proof of the exact pattern we're talking about, because the response to a bad asymmetric bet was never supposed to be take it anyway. It was supposed to be don't take this specific bet at this specific size. The wealthy version of Marcus's situation isn't a version where he has an easy yes. It's a version where he still says no, but for a completely different reason. Not, I can't afford this. Instead, this specific size at this specific risk doesn't protect me if I'm wrong. That's a decision anyone can make at any income the moment they know to ask it. This shows up in places you've probably never thought to connect. Insurance is the clearest one. Most people think of insurance as a monthly cost, something you pay because you're required to or because you're anxious. Wealthy households think of insurance as the cheapest way to cap the size of a catastrophic loss, and they'll happily pay a little more for it precisely because losing a small amount every month protects them from losing an amount that would change their life. It isn't caution. It's the same asymmetry question answered in the opposite direction, a decision where the downside of paying is small and known, and the downside of not paying is large and uncertain. Diversification works the same way, and it usually gets explained as don't put all your eggs in one basket, which is true but says nothing about why. The real reason isn't about the eggs. It's that when your money is split across enough different bets, no single failure can cost you everything, which means you can afford to be wrong regularly as long as you're never wrong catastrophically. That's the entire mental model. Rich people aren't trying to avoid ever being wrong. They're trying to make sure that being wrong is never expensive enough to matter. And this is the part that tends to catch people off guard the most. The same logic is exactly why people with real wealth are often more comfortable taking risks that look enormous from the outside, in things like equity or ownership stakes, while being far more conservative than expected about smaller everyday purchases. It looks contradictory until you realize it isn't. The big equity bet has a downside they've already measured and can survive. The small, impulsive purchase repeated often enough has a downside they haven't measured at all, and unmeasured downside is the only kind that's genuinely dangerous at any size. That's what's quietly controlling more decisions in your life than you'd expect. It usually shows up in something small, something people completely ignore because it doesn't look like a financial decision at all. It looks like a text message, a calculator app, a number that either fits in your account or doesn't. Remember that small detail from earlier, the $4,000, and what losing it would actually cost Marcus? This is where it actually matters, because Marcus didn't say no to a bad deal. As far as we know, it might have been a genuinely good one. He said no to a question he never learned to ask, using a framework, affordability, that was never built to evaluate risk in the first place. It was only ever built to evaluate whether the money existed. Whether the money should be risked at all was a completely separate question, and it went unasked. If any part of that felt uncomfortably familiar, the idea that you've been answering a question that was never designed to protect you or grow your money, just to check whether it was technically possible, there's more of this to unpack. And it doesn't get any more comfortable from here, because once you start noticing the affordability question standing in for a risk question, you'll start seeing it in almost every financial decision you've made this year. Here's the part that actually changes how you'd use this. It's not about becoming reckless, and it's not about only taking small, safe bets forever either. It's about separating two numbers you've probably been treating as one. The size of a decision and the exposure of a decision are not the same thing. A $4,000 bet with a survivable downside and real upside is not the same decision as a $400 bet that quietly threatens something you can't easily rebuild. A relationship, a credit history, your ability to pay rent on time. Rich people don't consistently make bigger bets than everyone else. They consistently make bets where they've already priced out the cost of being wrong at every size before the cost of being right ever enters the conversation. That's the whole shift. Not more money, not more risk tolerance. A different first question, where you ask, can I afford this? They ask, what does being wrong here actually cost me? And only once that number is small enough to live with do they let themselves get excited about the upside at all. Marcus is going to close his laptop tonight still believing he made the responsible choice. And in a narrow sense, he might be right. That particular deal at that particular size may genuinely not have been survivable if it failed. But the mail on his table stays unopened either way, and next month there will be another text, another opportunity, and the exact same sentence typed back without a second thought because the question itself never changed. The version of Marcus who starts asking about exposure instead of affordability isn't guaranteed to say yes more often. He might still say no to most things, but he'll be saying no for a reason that actually protects him, instead of a reason that just describes his bank balance on a random Tuesday night. And once you notice the difference between those two questions, it doesn't really stop showing up in your own decisions, in conversations about money, in the advice you've been given your whole life that never quite explained why it worked. The fact that you followed this all the way here already tells you something about the kind of person you're becoming with money. There's more where this came from, and it gets more specific from here, not more complicated, just sharper. Every week, this is the kind of pattern we go looking for. Not the surface-level version of financial advice everyone repeats, but the actual mechanism underneath it. The question people are really answering, whether they realize it or not. Because the goal was never to make you feel bad about the $4,000 you didn't put into something last year, or the insurance policy you've been quietly resenting paying for. It was to hand you the one question that separates the two ways people think about every dollar they'll ever touch. Not, can I afford this? Just, what does it actually cost you if you're wrong?